In my last video, we made a DIY style cabinet hardware jig to install cabinet door pulls. This type of jig works great for smaller jobs, but the downside is it's only really good for that one sized handle and on specific cabinet dimensions. If you have different size pulls or different size cabinets altogether, you're stuck making a new jig, and at that point, it might be worth the upgrade to a store-bought cabinet hardware jig. What's going on, guys? I'm Jody. This is Inspire Woodcraft. Today we're taking a look at the difference between a high-end and a low-end cabinet hardware jig. Now, in the past, I've tried really hard to do these comparison videos as neutral and unbiased as possible. With this one, I'm just gonna come right out and say this jig from True Position Tools is simply perfect. This is one of those rare times where I get a tool in my hand and it puts a smile on my face when I use it. And it's kind of funny saying that because it's such a simple design and it's really for a very specific task. Now the lower end jig, I don't remember for sure where I got this from. This one's just okay. And actually I almost didn't include it at all simply because it's not even square. Now I'll go over a few of the things to look out for with this one for those of you that are really on a budget and you can take the time to make this thing work for you. As always, I will leave links to these two jigs and maybe a couple others based on positive outside reviews down in the description for you guys so you can check out prices, shipping and all that. Let's take a look at how these jigs actually work. Essentially, they're both similar to T-squares, and they both have metric and imperial graduations along both the blade and the head, along with some various adjustment points. This large stop determines the distance between the center of a cabinet pull and the edge of a cabinet door, or the top of a drawer face. There's no marks to line up graduations. You simply read right off the face of the stop, adjusting it to the desired distance, and then tighten down the thumb screw. In this case, we'll set it to 3 inches. Now we know that our drawer pull will land exactly 3 inches from the edge of our material. On the head portion, you'll find 2 sliding drill guides. They both adjust left and right, and they can be set to any measurement, left or right, of center. So if we have a drawer pull that's, let's say, 6 inches, we can set both of these to the 3-inch marks, and now we know that not only is there 6 inches between those 2 points, but the 2 points are also perfectly centered on our jig. This feature alone makes installing drawer hardware super easy. That large stop we talked about a second ago actually has a notch directly in the middle of it. If I mark the top center of my drawer face, I can simply line up that mark with the notch in the jig, and now I know that my pull will line up perfectly in the center of my drawer. There's also non-adjustable center guides in the very center of both of these jigs. This is super handy for drawers and doors where you need to only drill one hole, especially if you need that one hole drilled perfectly in the center. The center guides also work well in conjunction with just one of the adjustable guides to be able to set your distance on your hardware without even doing any math. Since the center guide is permanently set to 0, you can set the other guide to whatever size the hardware is. So say you have a pull that's 96 millimeters on center, you could just set the guide to 96 millimeters and then use the sliding end stop to set how high up the door you want that handle to be. Speaking of the sliding end stop, this can be set to any point along either end of the jig. Simply slide it over to any measurement you need and tighten the thumb screw. Or you can do it an easy way. If you make a reference mark on the center of the door style itself where you want that lower screw to land, you can just hold the sliding stop firmly to the base of the door and slide the whole jig up or down until you see that mark show up in the center bushing. Then you can tighten the thumb screw. This will virtually eliminate any measuring and transferring mistakes. Now, the kit that I got from True Position Tools also came with this extension ruler and then a coupler that attaches it to the jig. And this extends the use of the sliding stop from 6 inches all the way up to 22 inches. If you had a whole bunch of drawers to work with, this will be a lifesaver for you. Just set the sliding stop to half the width of your drawers and go to work. You could do a whole bank of drawers and you don't have to measure each and every one. I actually discovered a super cool hack for this extension that I've yet to see anyone mention, including the folks at True Position Tools, and I'll show you guys that here in just a minute. And speaking of this, you can also buy this extension after the fact, like as in an add-on down the road if you're trying to save a couple bucks up front, but you'll actually save yourself like $20, I think, if you buy this in a kit where it's already included. And honestly, I think this extension alone really is what sets this jig apart from any of the other ones I've seen that are out on the market, and I really do think it's worth it. Now, as far as packaging goes, I may or may not have thrown the packaging for this away for the lower end kit. I do remember that it was broken down. It came in a nylon sleeve, and then that was inside a cardboard box. The True Position Tools kit comes in a blow mold case with detailed instructions and a few other goodies. Oh, and this is the instructions that came with the low-end kit. Now that we have a better idea for how they work, let's take a look at the key differences between the two. The lower end jig is made mostly of plastic. In fact, I believe the Amazon description says it's plastic and aluminum, and because of that, it's flimsy. I found that while using it, the plastic large stop flexed quite a bit, making it more difficult to hold into position and sometimes making the guide bushing scoot around a little in one direction or another. The higher end jig is made entirely of hardened aluminum with stainless steel thumb screws and case hardened steel guide bushings. The extra overall weight seems to give it a much more positive registration to the cabinet material as well. Now, when I opened the package for this jig, I had to assemble everything, and it's straightforward enough, but I had a hard time assembling these two pieces together, like it was hung up on something. And it turns out it was the sticker that the graduations are printed on to begin with. Apparently it catches on something inside the large stop, and you have to put a bit of force on it. I read reviews on Amazon where there's a few people who said they had the same issue and they had the same results, so I'm glad it wasn't just me. I did mess up the sticker a little bit, but honestly, I don't think it really matters because you can't use the stop way out here very well anyways. Now, unless you like crooked handles, these jigs need to be square. The high-end jig is set up and square right out of the case. The lower-end jig, well, not so much. In fact, it's out a 1/4 inch over its 16-inch run. Now, a 1/4 inch is quite a lot to be out of square over a 16-inch run, but there is a bit of a workaround here. If you're using normal size hardware, say 3 to 6 inches or so, you can make this work, but it's going to be some extra work on your end. Both jigs come with 5mm drill bits, but the screws for your hardware will typically be quite a bit narrower, meaning that once you put the screw in, you're gonna have a little wiggle room to straighten out your handles. Just leave them a little loose, straighten them up with a square, and then tighten them back down. It's kind of a pain, but it works. Now, anything past the, say, 6-inch or so mark might get a little sketchy as far as square goes because the jig flexes around so much and it not being square. Anything longer than, like I say, about 6 inches or so, and you may not have enough wiggle room for that adjustment. I mean, I guess you could be a little off and you probably won't notice the difference. You might not, because you're not a weirdo. Moving on to ease of use, when I put this thing together, same thing. I kind of had to force a few of these guides on and they didn't really want to travel too well. Now that I've been using it for a while, they seem to slide around fairly easy. As one would expect, the guides and everything else for that matter move smoothly on the True Position Tools jig right out of the box. It's also super easy to see all the graduations on the higher end jig. Everything's laser etched, including the indicators on the adjustable stops, and that sort of tan colored markings on the black background make it really easy to read. The guides on the lower end jig work a little bit differently. There's basically a sight window on the guide and a molded center indicator. That indicator isn't filled or anything though, so it makes it kind of difficult to see in low light situations. You can just take a fine tipped marker or even a pencil and highlight those to make them easier to see. Now there's one other thing I wanted to add about the adjustable guides on the high-end kit, which I think is a huge benefit. One side of the guides is tapped to fit these little low-profile rubber-faced thumb screws. This is specifically designed for shaker-style drawers where you have that inset face. Without these, you have to shim behind the jig to compensate for the depth distance. Not a huge deal for most, but definitely a huge plus if you do a lot of shaker-style drawers. Now, it might just be that I'm not that smart, but I kind of had an issue with this when I first started using this thing. The sliding stop on this one is quite literally the exact same thing as the adjustable guides. It just has a little tab screwed into the side of it. And because of how the slides work with the sight window and whatnot, it seems like you're supposed to use that sight window and line up the indicator with your measurement. It doesn't work that way. And the problem is, in reality, it doesn't need that sight window or a guide bushing or anything like that at all. And really, it just kind of makes it confusing. So if you end up getting a jig like this, do yourself a favor and just tape this whole thing up so you can't use the sight window and you're not tempted to use that guide bushing unless you want some extra holes in your cabinet. There is an obvious size difference between these two jigs, with the higher end jig measuring around 12 inches by 8 inches and the lower end jig coming in at about 16 by 10. And while that seems like you might be getting some more bang for your buck, keep in mind on average you'll probably spend most of your time in the 6 by 3 inch range anyways. For drawer faces, the lower end jig will let you go up to 16-inch wide pulls, albeit in this case not square. The higher end jig will let you go up to 12-inch pulls, but if you don't want to measure each drawer independently, you can use that extension ruler and the adjustable stop to work on drawers up to about 42 inches wide using those same 12-inch pulls. While still being able to use that adjustable stop on doors, the lower end jig maxes out around 14.5 inches, while the high end jig maxes out at about 10.5. But this is where the extension ruler hack comes into play. If you attach the coupler so that the extension ruler is secured closer to the large stop and slide the adjustable guide on backwards, you can work all the way up to about 26.5 inches. And yes, the holes line up perfectly using the jig this way. Now, honestly, if you're in the business of installing those really long drawer or appliance poles that are like $100, $200 a piece, you can't afford to use a subpar jig for your work anyways, so this very easily becomes a no-brainer. There are also other attachments that you can get for this jig that are specifically designed for repeated long handle installation, I think up to 38 inches long. I believe it also works for drilling shelf pins holes as well. Now, I don't have those in my kit. I will try to remember to leave links down below to some videos where people are actually explaining how that's done. Now, someone is inevitably going to say, well, you picked the very most expensive one and you picked the very least expensive one. What about the ones in the middle? And I totally see where you're coming from. These are the ones that got sent out. These are the ones that I reviewed. But I just want to leave you with a little bit of common sense approach to this whole thing. The companies that make tools like this, a lot of times, even in the middle tier, they don't make tools. They make things for you to buy. Companies that sell tools like this have made it an obsession to make the very best possible tool they can. That's why on True Position Tools website, you're gonna find tools. And in the low range, you're gonna find companies that sell everything from tools to oven mitts to towel hangers. In that mid-range, there you go from tools to, well, fake eyelashes. That's right, fake eyelashes. I think you see my point.